This podcast is part of the Michigan Sports and Entertainment Podcast Network. Go to michigansportsandentertainment.com for more great podcasts.
Welcome to MSE Countdown with your host, David Rosenberg and Chase Sussex. The countdown starts now.
How's it going, everybody? Another episode of the Michigan Sports and Entertainment Countdown coming at you. I'm your host, David Rosenberg. I'm here with Chase Sussex. Chase, what's up?
Oh, what's going on, everybody?
It's been a couple weeks since we talked to you guys, so we have a lot to kind of cover. Let's get to it. The countdown starts now. Well, our first story, it is July 28th, and this episode will probably go out on July 29th, so I think we kind of have to talk about the Detroit Tigers and the impending trade deadline. Nicholas Castellanos was a late scratch from today's game with quote-unquote abdominal tightness. So, you know, he's one of those three guys that we've talked about all season, Chase, with, you know, who we expect to be dealt. Do you buy that he was actually hurt, or do you think this was just saving him because there's a deal on the table?
Honestly, it could be a little bit of both, but honestly, I just think that they were holding him out just to, you know, as a potential trade. I think, honestly, just with how unhappy he is, and, you know, I've heard that there's some teams interested. I honestly just think that they're ready to pull the trigger, and they've got a couple teams, or at least one team, waiting to trade here. It just seems kind of weird that, I don't know, I guess this abdominal tightness is just kind of out of nowhere. I guess they said it was a precautionary measure. Maybe if they're trying to preserve his trade value, but
yeah, that's true. It's trade season, so, you know, I understand anything could be, you know, treated cautiously because, you know, he is precious cargo at this point. I just think that it's very convenient timing. I think the deal might be on the table, but we'll kind of just have to wait until tomorrow. So I think by the time that this episode drops at noon, I expect it to. We might know a little more, but probably not. So Nicholas Castellanos definitely could be dealt. Interestingly enough, I know his name comes up, but I don't know who would take him. We had kind of an interesting debate about his whole contract situation and what his value is. And you know, some of the writers in our conversation were separated on it. How much do you think he's worth? You know, I had some people, myself, I think, you know, if he signed a multi-year deal, some of those years could go up to $18 million. But I had other people saying that, you know, $13 million was appropriate, and that's you know, this day and age, $5 million is a decent sized gap still. What do you think his value is, Chase?
Yeah, somewhere in between that range makes sense. I think his value where he is, like the position he plays, I think is good, even though he's not really.
What if he moved to third? I know he's willing. I've heard reports that he's willing to move to third. I don't know that because I don't know the guy. But if he moved to third, do you think that raises his value? He's not particularly a great third baseman.
Yeah, he's not really a great third baseman, but I wouldn't really say he's a really good outfielder either. I mean, it's just kind of. He started off at third base with the Tigers, if I'm not mistaken, and then moved into outfield and has played multiple positions in the outfield. And, you know, he's not particularly. He's really more.
He's one of those
bat.
guys you find a spot for in the field because his bat's so important. I mean, he's got, you know, he can hit for contact and he can hit for power. Speaking of hitting for power, you know, this is something we didn't get to talk about over the past few weeks. Those comments that he made about Comerica Park being so deep. This was after a game. I think he hit a walk-off home run in that game. So, you know, for him to complain, and I know a lot of fans, especially on social media, really got on him. What did you make of those comments? I'm going to go back and find them so I can reread them.
I was kind of all over the place, but, you know, it sounded like at first he was just kind of airing his dirty laundry, you know, and kind of just airing his sins. But I think, honestly, when it comes to that, I mean, if you look at the home run, it had good distance on it. But, if you look at the walls in Comerica, it didn't look like it went very far. Like, I think it landed in the bullpen or something like that in the back.
I mean, in any other park, I mean, there's plenty of layovers out there on the internet that you can find. But in any other park, he has, you know, 30 or 40 home runs a season instead of what he's hitting, I think. He can hit for power, but here are the comments. This park is a joke. It's to the point where how are we going to be compared to the rest of the league for power numbers, OPS, slugging, and all this stuff when we got a yard out here that's 420 feet straight across to center field? And that's true. I think in the times that Detroit was like a power pitching team, right? Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer, all these guys, David Price, Anibal Sanchez, everyone, all sorts of greatness were kind of rotated through Detroit in pitching, and something that helped them was always that deep center field and a good center fielder to make the plays that went over their head. And I think that's been an advantage of Comerica Park for a long time, but in the bad years, it's more frustrating that you have a park that you can't, because if you look back to the 90s, right, you have guys like, even in the disappointing seasons, you have guys like, Prince Fielder's father, Cecil Fielder. He was still hitting home run after home run. He was a highlight. People went to the park to go see him. They went to Tiger Stadium to see him. No one is doing anything that, warrants paying for a $9 ticket, let alone, a $20 or $30 ticket. So I think that there's some merit here. The 420 feet in center is pretty deep. I believe it's 375 to left, and I'm not even sure what right is, but how often do you see someone go opposite field and hit a bell tire blast? That just doesn't really happen as often as you would like to see it. So maybe there's a discussion, because they did alter the park. In the after Comerica was built, they I think they moved in left field just a little bit because it was already farther. Maybe it's time to move in something else. I mean, those fountains will stay there. Maybe it's time to put some more statues somewhere out there in the back. What do you think?
No, I mean, yeah, I definitely think there could be some adjustments made. Because like you mentioned, I think he's got good merit in the fact that, he'd have 30 to 40 home runs for, the dimensions of the field. And like I said, you mentioned that there were people who were like, who've had success previously in Comerica with the same dimensions. Mm-hmm. But again, it's really kind of up in the air. Like I said, I know a lot of fans had some mixed reactions on the, but I think as a power hitter, and I think as someone who's hitting as an advantage, like for your team, I don't really know if necessarily I don't necessarily know if he's thinking in his head, oh, I'm not as good as a fielder. Like, obviously, I'm a better hitter. But I think as a hitting and offensive mindset, I feel like you're going into it and you're like, well, I want to hit more home runs. Obviously, I want my team to be better.
But conversely, on the other hand, right, doesn't the other team hit more home runs too?
Sure, yeah. I mean, obviously, the other, but again, when you're looking at the Tigers and comparatively to the rest of the league, other teams that come to play there, they don't have as many they don't have as much scoring issues and, as the Tigers do. And I mean, all of their struggles aren't related to hitting and just, their dimensions of the park and home runs. But it comes to say when, the Tigers are one of the worst teams in the MLB and, you don't really have a whole lot of power hitters on your team, I guess. And one of your best power hitters is complaining about the depth of your field. It's an issue, especially when he's hitting.
What about when the team gets good and Casey Mize starts complaining about, well, the field, it's not a pitcher's park. You brought me up to, and you gave me a terrible park because you adjusted it,
Well, that's where you have to look at Castellanos' value and say, well, if this is a player I want to listen to and, have for the long run, then we extend the field. But if it's a player that I'm going to trade away at the deadline, then whatever, he's complaining about it, no other teammates are complaining about it. We're going to get rid of him. Who cares what he thinks?
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
His value is exactly what this boils down to, because in the long run, the story of the season, is, at least with Castellanos, has been that the Detroit Tigers don't value him, or at least that's his perception, and he's becoming increasingly frustrated with the way the season's going and the way the organization's been treating him. So I think that this outburst, although it's been kind of ill-received by the public, I think that it's well-timed because it's a message. It comes after the Al Avila extension, up until which people have been kind of silent. But this is, if there is a star, I guess, on the Tigers, it's probably Nick Castellanos. So I think that this is just minorly symbolic of the frayed structure that is the Tigers organization right now. We spent enough time, I guess, talking about Nick Castellanos. Let's talk about the one of the other guys, Matt Boyd. He pitched today. He pitched fairly well. I mean, this was probably his best start in a while. He went 6 1/3. He gave up 3 hits, 1 earned run. So his ERA on the season is 3.94, which you can see is elevated from what it was earlier in the season when he was in the lower threes. He got 10 strikeouts again, so he continues to be a strikeout machine. But what do you think? I mean, do you think that this performance is enough to bring him back to enough value for a good deal for Detroit?
It's definitely a possibility. I think his value did fall quite a bit if you think about it, because even though his numbers aren't as good, the amount of support that he has around him as well, and it's always kind of tough when pitcher stats can kind of get misconstrued based on their other team performance, their teammates' performance, and other things like that. With the boosted ERA, I think, he still does have some trade value. I wouldn't necessarily say it was as high as it was in the season, but I think his strikeout numbers still are enough to warrant some sort of value there. You mentioned,
it's the youth and control too.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so there's obviously a lot of reasons to deal him, but that control is also a benefit for the Tigers. So if you're Al Avila in this rebuild, do you hold on to him or do you let him go?
Well, it's tough. I mean, I think I feel like the Tigers are pretty well along in the rebuild, but I also do think they have a long way to go. And unfortunately, I don't really know how Boyd necessarily fits into your. I mean, obviously, he would be a nice part of your pitching core, but when you have teams calling, I feel like that's sort of one of those things where you have to kind of do the better thing. And when you have guys like Mize coming up, and you guys got like Fulmer and others coming back, next season from injury, you're starting to think that maybe Boyd kind of slips down. He doesn't necessarily serve as that ace role next season. That's definitely a possibility that he falls down in
Fulmer will
on
come
the
back too. And I mean, I know a lot of people hope that he will fall into that ace role. For me, I lean more towards keep him. That control is so valuable, and at the end of the day, he is a good pitcher. He only shows potential, right? He's good now,
for sure.
And he can be great. Of course, he could regress, but that hasn't necessarily been the Tigers' MO when it comes to pitchers, right? They usually figure it out. They usually do a pretty good job. So I kind of have faith, that they can make him work. And I think that I don't know him, but I think that he's someone that could get a deal worked out where it fits comfortably into the plan that they have. Especially when they'll have other guys that they'll need to sign and offer big money to. So I'm not saying that he'll offer a discount, but I think that his value will prove to be exactly what the Tigers need. And he'll be somewhat of a veteran when Detroit becomes decent again, in my opinion. So for me, it's a hold on to Matthew Boyd, because I think that he's good. I think that he's good. I think that Fulmer will never be a number one again. I think that he's better served as a 2 or a 3 behind a true ace. So Detroit still will be looking for that. Obviously, they hope that it's Casey Mize, but we don't know exactly how long Casey Mize will take to get to the major league level. In the meantime, Bo Burrows is doing pretty well in the minors this season in Toledo, and a lot of people are questioning why he's not coming up and why guys like Drew Verhagen are making starts. So I wouldn't, he could come in and be like a young ace kind of thing if that works out, especially with a team that's lacking direction. So along with, Boyd and Fulmer and Turnbull, I like Turnbull too. I think those are 4 good things that you could do. So I'm not in favor of trading Boyd. No.
Fair point. Like I said, I just think it has to do with the length of the rebuild. How much longer, like you said, the guys like Mize and stuff like that have, and I think that's definitely a good point that kind of supports your argument. You keep Boyd around for a couple more years until these guys are sort of groomed into the spot. But I mean, I definitely think it depends on the prospects they get back. If they return enough, I definitely think that it's on trading Boyd, and it's definitely a possibility. But like you mentioned, I think in the short term, I think Boyd works out really well. But I don't know about in the long term.
It is all dependent on that contract, I think. You're right. Short term, he is a good answer. Long term, it's questionable. I just tend to lean towards positivity when it comes to him, at least. So okay, so we're kind of split. You would probably you would trade Boyd. I wouldn't necessarily. I don't know if we voted on Castellanos, so let's go back to him. Is Castellanos someone you trade? Yes or no?
I would say yes, just because of his I don't know. He just seems like he's unhappy with his role in the team, and I just feel like that's just not someone they don't have in their long term plans, and I don't really know if that's someone really keep around.
So he's a thumbs up for me too, because I just think you're right. He's a bit disgruntled. I don't think his money and his contract really works out with the Tigers' plan and his prime really, and he he will be a free agent next season, so really his value is gone once August begins. So I think they really have to consider trading him, and at this point I don't know what his value is. It's certainly not as high as Matthew Boyd's, so he's a must trade, but obviously you want to get the best deal you can out of him, in my opinion. But I think to truly prove that this is a rebuild, I mean, it's not like Tigers fans are expecting greatness out of this season. It's already trash. So, commit, get the boat, get another Casey Mize under your belt, get another Riley Green, and make this thing work next season. Because, I mean, Castellanos just doesn't want to be here. I don't think. So, and then that's the last one we have to vote on is Shane Green. What about him?
Shane Green is definitely more of an interesting one. I think his save, obviously he ranks in the top 5 in saves among pitchers.
Oh yeah, he's in the 20s. I mean, he's definitely, he's got a lot of saves. I mean, he really racked him up in the first 2 months of the season. But he's a good closer in my opinion, and I trust him.
That's the thing. I mean, the Tigers, unfortunately, are sometimes in a position where they don't. They're not ever really in a position where they need to make a save, per se. But I think it's tough when with someone with as much value as Green is sitting there on the table because he offers so much to the team, and he plays a similar role as Boyd. Is just the fact that he has a lot of value on the table to trade, but he also brings a lot to the team as well, and that's kind of always the question as to whether you keep a guy like Green on or you trade him because his value is high now and it might not be down the road. I think that's one of the biggest things.
Green's a tough one for me. He's not as clear cut as the other two in my mind. Boyd, I'm pretty solid on keeping him. I don't think unless someone offers the right deal, you should deal him. But with Green, one, he's got a year left of arbitration on his contract, so that's something to consider, right? That there's some control there. But like you said, he's very valuable to the team. And I mean, when was the last time Detroit had a solid closer? Like I think it was when Jose Valverde, got like 52 saves out of 52 saves in a season, and that was like 7 years ago. I don't know, 2012, 2011, something like that. So I think having a good closer is very valuable. I think that he'll be low cost as a good closer and an effective closer. Obviously, he can get the job done. I mean, he might blow a save here or there, but I think roughly, like, if you're paying a guy not that much money to do a good job, like, that's a win, right? And,
yeah, for sure.
And the Tigers, to have that kind of security at the back end of the bullpen when nothing is really secure on the Tigers, is something strong. So I say keep him. So the only one
here too, yeah.
The only one I'd like to again, the thing about the trade deadline when you're rebuilding is the right deal always comes in, right? If someone offers up the right prospect, it's there. If you if you want to say here's a top 5 prospect, Tigers should take that in a second. For any of those 3. But at the end of the day, I think Castellanos is kind of the must move here. Do I think he's going to be traded? For some reason, I don't. I think they're going to botch it, and they're not going to trade any of these guys. So I think Tigers fans are going to have a lot to be upset about over the next couple of months. Do you have that feeling too, or am I dead wrong?
Oh, I feel like I kind of have that feeling too. Even with the Castellanos stuff today, that kind of sort of increased my chances of maybe they actually do get a deal done. But
It just makes me think that something's on the table, right? Or at least that.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it at least indicates. I mean, we are certain that it indicates that trade talks involving Castellanos' name have elevated to the point where the Tigers organization feels it's valuable enough to take anything seriously. You know what I mean? Because that's what that precautionary
it's valuable
thing
enough.
says to me. That's what it says.
Talks are deep enough to the point where they're saying, well, we're either using him as a precaution to the point where if a team is interested, we're going to pull the trigger, or there's a deal in place and we're not playing him for that reason. So I feel like that's the thing. And then I think there was also comments about the fact there were scouts at the Tigers game watching.
Anthony Fennick said 6 scouts there watching Boyd. So people are going to want him, but they have to offer the right thing. That's to me, Boyd is so valuable because he's under control until like 2022 or something. So like, to me, he's so valuable because of the control and how good he is and how young he is. You have to offer someone else that's younger and better, in my opinion. Because
I
just
completely
do
agree.
not have to deal Boyd. I just don't think you do. So but like I said, any way you look at it, the Tigers fans are going to just be upset over the next couple of months because there's no meaningful baseball that's really going to be played, and that's always the worst thing as a fan. That's it's non-inspired baseball, and it's not. I don't think it's that the players don't want to win. It's that management isn't actively trying to get them to win, and that's an issue. But
I completely agree.
yeah, no, but the good thing is that the minor leagues are kind of working out, right? So last week, and there's actually an article up on the site MichiganSportsAndEntertainment.com about this. 2 Erie Seawolves kind of flirted with no hitters or really excellent pitching. Spencer Watkins and Scooball, I'm forgetting his first name, but they both had excellent outings, which. Those are not 2 of the names that you hear me talking about, right, Chase? Like, you don't know anything about the minors, but have you ever heard me bring up those names, Scooball and Watkins?
I've heard of them, but I can't really say, like, I wouldn't be able to bring up their first names. Like, I've like tiny things, but I don't really think I've ever necessarily heard you bring them up.
Which is good, because, the guys that you don't expect, when they're, like, flirting with no-hitters at the AA level, it means that they're getting ready for AAA, which means that they are working out, right? So,
exactly,
these were relatively, like, high picks and stuff like that, but the guys who aren't Casey Mize, I mean, everyone, if Casey Mize didn't work out, that would be news. But when these guys behind him fill out, that's how that gets me excited. That lets me know that, man, something's really building here. There's a lot of pitching that's going to come up, and it's going to be really, really strong. And in 3, 4, 5 years, the Tigers are going to be a really strong pitching team. No one's going to want to face them. And that's, it takes us back to kind of the beginning of this conversation. I don't think you bring in any of the walls. I think you leave the deep center field. I think it's iconic. I think the park is approaching 20 years. You let it go for another 20, and it's something that people really remember. It's why Nick Castellanos left. It's why, Curtis Granderson and Austin Jackson and Jacoby Jones were known as elite. Got their chance to prove that they were elite fielders, things like that. So I think it's somewhat iconic, and you leave it in. So let's move on to story number 2. The Michigan Wolverines. Well, actually, you posted this. Let's talk about this because you posted this on our Twitter at MSE Countdown. If you're not following, but 13.2 million viewers. Michigan versus OSU. That was the highest rated game that wasn't a bowl game, right? Or the highest viewed game that wasn't a bowl game?
Yeah, that was the highest viewed bowl game, or the highest viewed non-bowl college game of last season. Even though the score definitely was not in Michigan's favor by even a close margin, it was still the 7th most viewed game in the country and the first viewed non-bowl game in the country, which just goes to show you how intense that rivalry is.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so excited for this season, because there's so many new elements that go into what happens this year. Obviously, not the result that they wanted last season, and Just unfortunately, I feel like Michigan has come on, past couple of years. It's just been one of those things where, the last couple of years they were a quarterback short of being a good playoff team, and then they got Shea Patterson, and I feel like OSU's matchup last season, like the team itself had a good season, but it wasn't. I feel like that was just a one bad matchup they had the entire season. Ohio State runs an offense that pretty much made Michigan's defense look incredibly vulnerable because it's the exact offense that counters Michigan's defense. They run with, and Michigan's guys couldn't cover that. They obviously couldn't make and as good as a defensive coordinator as Don Brown is, he couldn't adapt to that offense, and it's a tough offense to handle. I mean, that's why Ohio State's offense is as good as it is.
So,
but again,
here's the thing. Let me talk about this because I love the game. Okay, I love that it's in rivalry week. I don't even like to say that school's name necessarily. That's how intensely I take this, and a lot of other Michigan fans take it that seriously. But when you look at the SEC, and I'm not someone who's going to go praising the SEC constantly, but Alabama plays a bunch of teams all year, and then they often get a chance to play them in the championship, right? That conference?
I would say Alabama's strength of schedule. If you look at their strength of schedule, it's very low. Their total strength of schedule before they get into any of the SEC games, and yet their SEC games aren't even really that tough. I mean, really, if you look at it, they're
But what I'm saying is, I don't understand. Like the Big Ten championship, right? Like the SEC championship is always a big deal, right? It's always two powerhouses that have been great all season that you want to see. I don't understand why the game is a de facto playoff game, right? Because it's always, Michigan and Ohio State, whenever they play, they're often undefeated or they're often contending for the top spot in their division, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they play some other team, right? Like I don't know who, like Iowa or something. Like they roll over.
So no, I understand what you're saying. So yeah, I know the thing that you're putting down here because Ohio State ended up beating Michigan.
If it does 13.2 million viewers, why would you not make it happen twice?
That's the thing. I think what you're talking about there is the division alignment. You're talking between the difference between the Big Ten West and the Big Ten East.
Absolutely, yeah. The West and the East, they're imbalanced.
Yeah, they're very imbalanced because, like you mentioned, yeah, you saw Ohio State. You saw Ohio State beat Michigan last year, and then they went on to play Northwestern in the Big Ten championship to get as a potential, playoff implication game, which doesn't make any sense because Northwestern isn't anywhere close to Ohio State in terms of skill. So that, the implication for that, for possibly, like you said, the SEC championship game.
Oftentimes, aren't you left, doesn't the game come down to the last second? Isn't it always down to the last drive?
I mean, you saw it a couple of years ago, the whole JT was short thing in that Ohio State game where Michigan came that close.
And you're telling me that you wouldn't want another game to help the college playoff committee decide? I just think that, I'm sure there's lots of people who agree with me, and I can't imagine why you wouldn't agree with me. But, please, if you have a devil's advocate point, speak up. But it just seems so obvious to me, and that's why I wanted to talk about this rating, and I'm glad you tweeted out that picture because it's such a Michigan is one of the most storied, Ohio State too. They're storied programs, and their rivalry is even more legendary. So I just don't really understand why you wouldn't give the opportunity. And it's not like there aren't years that, what are the other teams like that are in that? Penn State, right? They deserve a chance. Michigan State has often been good too. I just think that there's always room, and I think that it would make the Big Ten look more serious, and it would help get them into the college football playoffs more often. That's why you see two SEC teams, because they have this infighting that makes it look so competitive, which is exactly what you were saying earlier. It's not that competitive, but you see Alabama, Georgia at the beginning of the season, and Alabama steamrolls Georgia, and then Georgia steamrolls the rest of the SEC, and then they meet up again later. It's like, well, I want to see this again.
No, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, so I mean, maybe I definitely think that it might be time for. I think there's just the whole division needs to be looked at. I know a lot of people just think that teams like, I mean, obviously, there's bad teams in every division, but you look at teams like Rutgers and stuff like that who pull the division down. They really do. I mean, and it's unfortunate, but the Big Ten does not look like a threat. When you look at, Ohio State, or it's usually Ohio State or Michigan, sometimes Penn State. Michigan State obviously was a couple years ago when they were in the college football playoffs, but
yeah, it's funny. It's funny that now, while you're talking, I'm coming to this kind of conclusion that essentially what you have is you kind of have like a winner's bracket and a loser's bracket. I'm not saying that everyone in the other division, and I don't know which one. I think it's the East is the one I'm talking about, but I'm not saying everyone in that division is terrible. They're just often not at like their best. Northwestern is often not at the bar that the third or fourth team in the other division. Yeah, right?
Like Northwestern isn't bad. Like Northwestern is. I mean, last year obviously they were the best team in the West, and I mean, and I'm not saying they're a bad program by any means, but I don't think that kind of program necessarily compares at all caliber of teams that Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State were last season.
Yes,
you just can't compare the two or the three programs.
And for me, it's playing to the losers. That's kind of what you're saying to me is that you're playing to the teams that really don't get it going, and it makes it more competitive in one division so that everyone has a chance, because Northwestern realistically wouldn't have a chance to be anything but the fourth or fifth team in the other division, so now they have a chance to compete for a Big Ten championship. But in my mind, that is not like survival of the fittest, which is what competition and what making your conference should be all about. So that's something I just kind of wanted to touch on, and I'm glad you kind of agree with me there. I know, speaking of Michigan football, there was someone committed, a safety you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, so a big 2020 safety just committed to Michigan not too long ago. His name is R.J. Moten. He's in the ESPN Top 300.
Nice.
For prospects heading into 2020, so that's always a big land there. Like I said, R.J. Moten, really good safety. I believe he's out of New Jersey, if I'm not mistaken, 8th best safety in the state. The kid's really good.
New Jersey guys.
They're really, for whatever reason, they are really big in New Jersey.
It's a pipeline now. I mean, I don't. Sure. I because I'm relatively young. So are you. I haven't been following Michigan recruiting for so long, but it seems the first class. I mean, this isn't too long ago, but the first class that I seriously remember following was kind of Jabril Peppers. So and he's from New Jersey too. So it just seems like since then that they've been such a pipeline from New Jersey, and it's kind of cool to see. It gets me excited because I don't know anything about the kid you're talking about, but when you say, "Oh, New Jersey," I'm like, well, he's probably something.
But yeah, I mean, like I said, you got is from New Jersey. Jordan Moran, another 4-star safety commit for 2020 is also from New Jersey. They've got just a lot of good, kids coming out from this area. I'm not sure what it is about, this specific area of, just that northern kind of area that's attracted to Michigan. But whatever it is, I mean, they've got really good recruiting over there. They have other guys from New York and other prospects like that for 2019 and 2020, that are from that area, which is really good. I mean, obviously you want your recruiting to outstretch past. So the more national kind of recruits you're getting, especially in that area, is really good.
Yeah, for sure. Is there more you wanted to talk about this kid?
No, I mean, I think that's it. I mean, I haven't really seen a whole lot of his tape or anything like that, but adding to the secondary there for Michigan is always positive.
So the other thing we have to talk about when it comes to Michigan that we've missed over the past couple of weeks is that a lot of reporters have projected them to win the Big Ten. So is this just your classic July optimism from the Blue Faithful, or is this realistic? Do you think that they're going to win the Big Ten?
definitely think they have a shot to to win the Big Ten. Like I said, this year the Ohio State game is obviously in Ann Arbor, so they definitely have a shot to win the Big Ten. I think they win most of their games. The Ohio State game comes down to whether they win the Big Ten or not, or even make the playoffs, I should say, too. If they're but in terms of winning the Big Ten, I definitely think they've come close to winning the Big Ten over the last couple of years. So it's definitely a possibility.
It's always getting
I think
over
it's
the
way
hurdle
too early
of
to
Ohio
say.
State. I think. Okay, so here's the question: let's assume they do beat Ohio State, because we can't have this discussion without it. If they beat Ohio State and they go undefeated, is their schedule strong enough to get them to the college football playoff? Assuming they win by decent margins, or relative margins.
Absolutely. If they beat Ohio State, even though it's in Ann Arbor, and they go undefeated, that means they beat both Notre Dame and they beat Penn State. I think absolutely, depending on how good those teams are, I think absolutely you're with the Big Ten championship win over whoever in the world it is in the Big Ten West who ends up winning, I think your resume, or at least Michigan's resume, is good enough to make the college football playoffs for sure. I feel like if they go undefeated, that's my statement right there. If they go undefeated and beat Ohio State and win the Big Ten championship, 100%. That's
the wins over Penn State and Notre Dame. You said they don't play Notre Dame this year, do they?
Play Notre Dame. They have. I'm almost positive.
Oh, they do.
I was gonna say they play Notre Dame this season.
Oh wow. Okay. Oh, so if they beat Michigan State, Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Penn State, they do have a pretty good argument to sneak in. But there's always that quote unquote SEC bias. But I think that this is something to get excited about if you're a Michigan fan, and that it isn't just smoke being blown, by reporters and a media bias to Jim Harbaugh because he's nice, or not nice, but a good guy to cover. And
that's the thing.
And it's not like Ohio State hasn't had its share of bad press, so they're kind of villainous right now. It's easy to not pick them, but Ohio State always comes with a chip on their shoulder. So I don't think Michigan can take any game, let alone that one, lightly. But if they do manage to eke out a perfect season, I think a college football playoff berth is realistic.
I don't even worry about playoffs. Honestly, you just got to beat both your rivals.
One game at a time.
You got to beat Michigan State. You got to beat Ohio State. I feel like even if they don't make the playoffs, if they go undefeated and beat Ohio State,
what's their first real test?
Somehow
Wisconsin,
I believe,
or Iowa. It goes Middle Tennessee, Army, Wisconsin, Rutgers, Iowa.
Well, I actually think that the Army game is a little bit of a trap game. Honestly, I think that's their first as big. I think it's definitely a trap game. I think they could definitely struggle with that because I think that's on the road. If I'm not, or maybe they are. I don't know necessarily where the game is being played.
Exciting. But still, we're talking about college football. We're like a month out from college football.
I know it's close.
It's incredible. It's been such a struggle the past couple of weeks to watch sports, especially Detroit sports, right? Because, God knows the Tigers, man. And with the drafts being over, it's kind of that dead period. But football's coming back, man. Things are picking up. I think we should do a full preview of the schedule next week.
For sure, we will definitely do that next week. But like I said, yeah. So they definitely do have some tests in their schedule. But like I said, they have to win the season, honestly.
Yep. And all right, so let's go on to our third story of the night. That is the Detroit Lions. We have kind of a bunch of things to talk about the Detroit Lions, and it'll lead into our fourth story, which is going to be an interview. So make sure you stick tight for that. But there's a couple things that we missed while we've been gone, and well, I think this is the big one. Before we talk about any deals or signings and leaving and stuff, but this is the most insulting one, and it's almost similar to the conversation we just had. But it's on the opposite end of the spectrum. People are projecting the Lions to go 3-13.
I guess. That's what I saw. Okay, so where this is coming from, if you guys are unaware, is the USA Today predictions, which are basically awful every season. If you just, outside the Lions, you should see some of the predictions they have. The Lions going 3-13. And honestly, I think that's a little bit insulting. Looking at their schedule. I mean, the Lions don't really have. We have a lot to be excited about as Lions fans, but let's say as someone out from the outside looking in, I still definitely don't think, looking at their schedule, they have like 13 games that they lose. I just think it's so tough.
13 games is a lot of games to lose, you know.
It's a lot of games.
Even the most pessimistic Lions fan right now wouldn't guess 13 losses this season. And I just think that it's, you know, like you said, these polls, this one in particular is always terrible. And you know, I laughed about this because, you know, I just blew it off because it's unrealistic. It isn't. If it comes to fruition, I will, you know, eat my own words. Oh well. But I just think that it's, you know, a story that needs to be shaken off because as Lions fans, we know better. We know better, don't we?
Oh yeah. Okay. So here's the thing: the only scenario I think the Lions realistically go 3-13 is if Matthew Stafford gets hurt for some extended time of the season.
Yeah, if Stafford gets in like a car accident and loses a leg. And at the same time, Darius Slay tears his meniscus and ACL and ruptures his Achilles. And, you know, if Kenny Galladay and Kerryon Johnson both get busted for smoking pot in the clubhouse or something, you know, like it's
unrealistic.
Yeah, something, I don't know. Something ridiculous would have to happen, I think, for the Lions to go 3-13. And the reason I'm so confident, right, and I'll let you break this one if you want to, is because the Lions made an awesome signing.
Yeah, so the Lions made a pretty big splash signing. If you guys are not aware of just overall NFL news, the Packers released 7-year veteran Mike Daniels, defensive tackle, and the Lions basically swooped in and made this signing. They signed him to a 1-year deal. I believe it was like $9.1 million with like 7.5 guaranteed, I think is what the deal was. You know,
that's a good price.
Yeah, it's a good price. It's a good price. I think there's a lot of things you can kind of break down about this. Not only is this a good pick to help their defensive line because Daniels is great against the run. He's an underrated pass rusher. He's not really a big sack guy, but, you know, like I said, he's someone who brings a lot to the table. I think there's some bigger things that kind of go down here. And I want to read this tweet here because there were some big things that sort of happened when it came to Detroit. And I know one of the things that he mentioned I think one of the driving points of the fact that he said Matt Patricia was the biggest reason as to why he came to Detroit.
Yep.
And I believe there were 13 other teams. There's a tweet that I saw. There were 13 other teams that were interested to either pay the same amount that Detroit was paying or even more for Mike Daniels.
I believe 13 teams were in talks with him, or at least
were in talks, yeah. But there were multiple teams who were either going to
pay. Four teams, I think, offered more or the same deal as Detroit, and he took Detroit, and he took Detroit because of Matt Patricia, and he said I think he called the guy a genius, right?
Yeah, so this is the quote he said. So this is from Chris Berg, NFL. He said, he said the reason. It says Mike Daniels asked why he picked Detroit. Coach Patricia straight up. He's just a genius. He really is. He understands the game of football. He knows what it takes. To be able to play for a coach like that, it means everything. Big, powerful words for a guy like Patricia. And I think the national scheme of things, a lot of players, you know, I know Daniels said in the offseason, I want to go play for a team that's a playoff contender. And, you know, a lot of people are like, well, the Lions aren't playoff contenders, or no one wants to come play for the Lions. No one wants to come play for Patricia. And I think this is just another signing that shows you that Matt Patricia has something special here in Detroit. You had big free agent signings like, you know, Trey Flowers, now Mike Daniels. You had other guys come in here in free agency, and everyone's like, oh, no one wants to come to Detroit. Look at these names that just came to Detroit. And they're building something here. Obviously, I mean, you look at this, and Patricia has a big name. And even though a lot of people were saying, "Oh, Patricia's not the guy," and they went 6-10 last year, and the expectations didn't live up to the hype or whatever it was. I mean, it was one of those things where this is a good sign. If a player as good as as Mike Daniels is, as good as Packers players and fans have said that Mike Daniels is, this guy used to play this guy played in the Pro Bowl previously. This guy obviously is good. This guy obviously knows what he's talking about when it comes to football, and he's calling the Lions head coach a genius when it comes to football.
Yeah, and the important thing here is that, he obviously there's, this isn't the first time a Packer became a Lion, right? I think the most recent one you can think of is TJ Lang, who just retired. But I always like it when someone moves within the division, right? Because he wanted to stay in the division, He liked where he played, and he liked the style and all of that. And he knows things, And I think one of the things that Detroit was missing was a strong second defensive tackle behind Damon Harrison, because all of a sudden I think that front seven is looking pretty scary.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got guys like Ashawn Robinson, Deshaun Hand, like you mentioned, Damon Harrison. You've got Trey Flowers on the edge, and then you add Mike Daniels on the interior. I mean, this is going to be a scary team to run against. You're going to need a good offensive line, a pretty good running back to run against this offensive line. It's going to be tough.
And I don't think people should undersell the linebackers either. I think that
absolutely not. I mean,
there's obviously some of them are young, but I think that this defense is really going to step up, and I think this defense is happy together, which is something that I don't often see on the Lions, I feel like. So it'll be really exciting for them if they start to succeed and continue that success. The challenging part will be if they hit a bump in the road. They'll have to deal with that adversity, and that's always the test of a true gritty defense, and I expect them to kind of handle that really well. Is there any more contract extensions and stuff like that? A lot of stuff we missed, right?
I actually do want to touch on one more thing that involved the Mike Daniels thing first, because obviously in a corresponding move, the team cut Theo Riddick. And I know a lot of people were kind of sad to see Theo Riddick go.
Your segue.
But I think one of the things that's important here about this Riddick release, as good as I think Theo Riddick was, and obviously they used him, he was obviously valuable in their offense. I really just think it means it's an exciting season upcoming for Kerryon Johnson. Obviously, Theo Riddick was a big pass catching back, and he took a lot of passes away. I mean, I think he led the league in receptions for a non-wide receiver, if I'm not mistaken. So I mean, the dude was crazy good, and obviously he took a lot of receptions, and the Lions relied on him a lot, and now they
liked
someone
him as that kind of
two-way
two-way back, and he took a lot of snaps away. So the question is what percentage of the snaps do you think Kerryon's getting this season?
I think Kerryon Johnson's going to get a huge increase in him a lot in the passing game. I know that I think they're Patricia was a little bit hesitant to kind of get him back, and they were sort of going to ease him back into the offense and use C.J. Anderson, in that role. It's to kind of start the season because obviously he's coming off an injury.
As a third down back. I would like to see Kerryon Johnson in at least 60% of snaps taken on the field. I think it's his time. I mean, 60% doesn't sound like much, but when you're on the field for half the snaps, especially as a running back, it does get pretty tiring, and that's why they have things like third down backs. I still think that he's young, and I'm a big I support easing a guy into it because I think that people take time to develop. But I agree. I see Kerryon taking a bulk of the carries, probably more than the 60, closer to 70, maybe 80%. But I still think Anderson's gonna take some of the snaps away, and then you have Zenner still on the roster as well. So,
so here's the thing. I'm all for the Kerryon Johnson hype train. Song "Carry On My Wayward Son." He absolutely deserves it. I don't, as much as a lot of people I know like Zach Zenner, and he's a gritty type of guy. I really want the majority of your snaps to be going to Kerryon Johnson. If he's not in the field, then it's C.J. Anderson.
But I just don't think you realize how taxing that is, especially on a young guy, right? This is your franchise guy, right? You need him to take, especially because I expect Detroit to be competing for a playoff spot, right? So you need him down the stretch, right? Like that the Thanksgiving game and afterwards is where it's going to get really important, I think. So, you want him healthy for that. So I'm okay if he's not. If he doesn't, if he's taking only like 50% or a little less at the beginning of the season, I'm actually really okay with that.
For me, I would be frustrated with that. I understand his injury concerns, my thing is the fact that he just didn't get enough touches last year. I had an issue with the fact that with how many touches. I can't
He's
remember his
young,
name.
though.
LeGarrette Blount. Yeah, he's young. I understand that.
LeGarrette Blount.
But
LeGarrette Blount should not have gotten as many touches. You are right.
But
LeGarrette Blount's a different guy, right? If Anderson starts to botch it, and if Zenner gets, maybe like a little step up, and then he starts to botch it, then by all means. But I think that if you ease him into the role, and if everyone plays their part, and you start to grow, help him grow and understand what it means to be like a franchise running back, I just think it's the right move. But
I don't know. I get their concerns about it, and obviously I know they refuse to call him, or sort of use Kerryon Johnson as a bell cow kind of back. But I do see Kerryon Johnson as a 3-down back, someone who's in there all 3 downs. I just feel like that's just the kind of player he will evolve into, and I think the only way a player evolves into like that is receiving more snaps. So maybe you do ease him into it, but I'm more of a guy who says week 1 I want to. Not only in the run game, but in the pass game as well. I want to see. It's not that I don't want to see C.J. Anderson. I'm excited to see C.J. Anderson. Had a great season last year, but I don't want to see as much as Zach Zenner. I don't want to see as much of those other players on the field. I want to see Kerryon Johnson the bulk of the time running the football.
All right, we'll have to agree to disagree because we have time for. Is there one more move, signing, extension that you want to talk about before we move on to our next topic?
I think one of the other things I want to talk about, the holdouts between, like we mentioned before, you had Damon Harrison and Darius Slay.
That's probably
good. They didn't end up going to camp. I think they're on the NFI right now, if I'm not mistaken, the non-football injury list, which means they're not currently playing, so they haven't participated at all in camp. But the fact that they agreed to go to camp is definitely a good sign. I think it's a step in the right direction in terms of, I think, contract talks are in the way, or underway, I should say, and, that it's a good sign for sort of, at least I'm having my fingers crossed is that the Lions are going to figure out extensions or just, better contract incentives for them down the road.
I think it's promising. I think that's kind of why I was so high on the defense earlier. I think they enjoy playing with each other. I think they're going to figure out a way. And it is encouraging that they've agreed to come to camp. So with that, let's move on to our 4th story. We promised an interview, and we have one. There was kind of a heartwarming story that one of our writers was involved with. So we're going to get Ben on the line. Stand by, and we'll do the interview. All right, we're back. We have Ben Candelas on the line. Ben, your son got the chance to meet Matthew Stafford, and I think a lot of Lions fans got the chance to see that video and the story that your tweets kind of shared. So let's have you walk us through everything that happened.
Yeah, so, first off, thanks for having me on here, guys. And, really the way it all started was honestly just kind of a shot in the dark tweet. It started on Thursday. I was planning on taking my family to training camp regardless on Saturday, and my son, who just turned 6 back in May, he's been a Stafford fan since he could basically talk. When he was first recognizing numbers, he was pointing out the number 9 in the grocery store. Like, Dad, look, it's number 9. It's Matthew Stafford's number. Like, he's just been this super fan of Stafford. And I'm sure he probably gets a lot of that from me just being a Lions fan. So just decided to take a shot in the dark on Twitter. Figured let's use social media for what it actually is supposed to be, used for. Mm-hmm. And I was going to direct message the Lions. I wasn't trying to go out of my way and tag anybody, tag any players, tag any, writers. It was mostly just, hey, if this can happen, great. So I put a post out there, including a picture of him at camp last year. And then a picture that he had actually drawn during kindergarten this last year. And he chose Matthew Stafford, of all people, as someone that he knew a lot about that he had to write about. So, that just kind of shows how deep his fandom is for for the quarterback. And so, yeah, I included that with it, and it took off. I didn't necessarily expect it to, I guess, quote-unquote, go viral, but in many ways it did. I had over almost 200 people retweeting it and tagging the Lions and tagging the players and comments and things like that on it. So from there, the Lions actually direct messaged me through Twitter and said that they were trying to set something up.
Well, I think one of the things that we also kind of, at least that I saw with the post, and, like you mentioned, it went viral. One of the things that was on his, his drawing there was the Ryle God. Do you kind of want to explain what that sort of was? I know that kind of people try to get that sort of hashtag going, and what was that the story behind that?
So what's really funny is, like you said, that was part of his drawing, and he is basically just his kindergarten spelling. What he really was supposed to be saying is that he is really good. But of course, he spelled really Rile, and good. He only used one O. So, and as we all know in the sports world, anybody who's remotely good is considered a god. So, I think that kind of took off as a hashtag, and everybody just started calling him, calling Stafford the, however you want to pronounce it, the Riley God or the, whatever it was. So I thought that was actually kind of cool because I'm like, something my son wrote now is people are almost trying to make like a new nickname for Stafford.
Yeah, so an awesome moment there, and like you mentioned, just kind of was it kind of like to meet Matthew Stafford yourself? Obviously, it was a cool moment for your sons to meet him, and but what were some of your impressions? Because I know you had you obviously voiced your opinion about Stafford and stuff like that, and just that kind of. But do you kind of want to give your sort of impressions of how he was like in person?
Yeah, so I thought the coolest thing was him as soon as he walked up, he had that picture that I had originally posted. He actually had that with him. One of the PR guys for the Lions gave it to him. So I mean, you can kind of tell in the video when he first walks up. I mean, he addresses my son by name. He kind of made it personal for him. He had the picture, and you can kind of hear it in the video as well. He goes, well, what's this? You drew this for me. You're the artist. And I think that just kind of speaks to, I guess, really just the type of person that he is. Because, you see him on TV, and Stafford is probably one of the more private players out there, especially at the quarterback position. I mean, he himself isn't on social media or anything like that. So, I mean, us as fans, we don't really get a good look into the private life of Matthew Stafford, outside of, what other players might talk about, or I know his wife has a pretty big following on Instagram, and she'll, post some pictures of him just being a dad and things like that on there. So, for me, that was just the coolest part is really just kind of seeing the guy that you think he is the guy that he actually is as a person. He was super personable with my kids. It was something that it was after practice. It was super hot out that day. I mean, he could have really just blown it off or just signed a quick autograph and been done with it. But, he at least took a minute to sit with them and sign whatever it was that they wanted signed, and high-fived him at the end, shook hands, things like that. I mean, you could just tell he's just a genuinely good dude. And from my standpoint, I mean, certainly I'm a fan first and foremost, but I mean, I'm a dad and a husband and things like that as well. So for me, I guess I'm not someone that gets super starstruck per se, especially, I mean, now I'm almost 30 myself. So, I mean, Stafford's only got about a year or two on me. So, I mean, to me, it was just, I tried not to get too starstruck by it. I mean, to me, it was more like, hey, this is just a normal guy, and he's a superhero for my kids. So that was just a cool moment to see them get to experience.
Man, that's awesome. I think, like, again, I think not only an awesome moment for your kids, but also for you, I'm sure, as a fan. I wanted to get one more question in, because obviously I know you're a big Lions expert on our website here at Michigan Sports Entertainment. And obviously, besides this moment here on the, after practice is over, what were some of the things that you sort of noticed, like, on the field? I know you're big into the Lions, and, you obviously there at camp to watch, the Lions themselves. So what were some, were there some certain players that you noticed, and, kind of outside of Matthew Stafford and himself, sort of some of the other players that you noticed as a Lions sort of writer and analyst, just as, outside of, the meeting with your kids?
Yeah, I will say that, unfortunately, going to events like this with the family, it was both my boys who are currently 6 and 3, well, almost 3, and my wife. Unfortunately, you don't get to necessarily sit and watch practice. I mean, if I was there by myself, that's all I would have done. But anyone that's experienced an event like that with a family, you don't necessarily you don't get to just sit and watch. But we tried to do that as much as possible. And from what I did see, a couple of things that did really stand out for me. One of them was, I guess, hitting on the hype train right now with TJ Hawkinson. Seeing him out there, I mean, he was battling every rep that I saw. I mean, he was out there just blocking guys, blowing guys off the line. I mean, as much as you can read about right now, I mean, 4 or 5 days into camp now, I mean, he really does look like he was an awesome pick for them as far as his blocking abilities go. I know he's been making plays in the passing game as well at camp, and fortunately I wasn't able to see anything like that. But I'm sure he was doing it. I just was probably behind the bleachers in the shaded area. But a couple other guys that really stuck out. One of them was Rashawn Melvin, the corner that we signed this year. He was longer than I expected. I've seen him play a little bit, but seeing him in person, I mean, lined up alongside Kenny Galladay, I mean, he looked almost every bit as big as Kenny Galladay, at least in the sense of length. So he looks like someone that, if he's buying into the system this year, that he could probably make a big difference as an outside corner for the Lions this year. And then another guy that I got a chance to see was CJ Anderson. Let me tell you, he's a big running back. I mean, I've heard others describe him as a bowling ball style guy. I mean, I know he's usually out there wearing like a hooded sweatshirt. I was actually listening to one of the other beat reporters basically kind of going over this today as well. But just CJ Anderson, he's a big dude, so he's going to be a force for them in the running game when Kerryon needs a break. I mean, he's going to be out there pounding defenses. You can just tell just the way that guy's built.
Awesome, yeah. So, Ben, I have to ask, you said your son's 6, right?
Yep.
This was recorded on video, and the tweets will forever be there. What did he understand what was happening? I mean, he knew he was meeting Matthew Stafford, I'm sure, but like, is this something you think he's going to remember? Because 6 is awfully young.
Yeah, it's something that I think about quite often as a father, is kind of looking back on my childhood. You know, what are some of my earliest memories and how old I was? And usually, at least at that age, I think for most of us, the only things we really remember are things that were either traumatic, like you broke a leg or you something crazy like that, or I think some sort of like an event that just would really stick out.
Something exceptional.
Yeah, exactly. Something that really sticks out. So I have to imagine this is going to be something that really will stick out for him. The one thing I keep saying is, what I thought was awesome is that the Lions printed off that picture that he had drawn, that I had posted on the original post. It was something sitting there in the stands. I thought, oh, I should have brought that with me. And then when they showed me that they had printed it off, like, that's awesome, because I keep saying now, how many people in general, kids, can say that their childhood hero signed something that they drew when they were in kindergarten?
Yeah, for real.
So, you look back in all the archives that your parents may have kept of anything that you drew as a kid or anything that you wrote, and thinking back, who are some of your earliest childhood superheroes on the in the sports world? For some of us, maybe it was Barry Sanders, or outside of the Lions, someone maybe like Ken Griffey Jr. or something like that. But just to think like, oh man, I always loved watching that guy, and now he's going to get to the point where he's in his 20s and he's got this framed thing of, I drew this in kindergarten, and look, Matthew Stafford signed it. And who knows what kind of career Stafford's going to go on to finish. I mean, at this point, he's on pace to at least maybe be top 5 and in the record books for yards, for touchdowns. And if by hope that he can bring the Lions to prominence, to maybe even get into the Super Bowl at some point here in the next 8 to 10 years, hopefully sooner than that. Stafford's going to go down as a legend locally, and then hopefully potentially be a Hall of Famer. So, I think things like that will help this moment stick out with him for my son. And I think that it's something that we'll probably always talk about. So my hope is that kind of keeps the memory alive for him, but certainly having the pictures and the videos and things like that will really kind of keep this moment alive for him.
Yeah, I think you're right. Obviously, Stafford's career and the Lions' success will help preserve that memory, but I do think that you're right. We often remember some of, like, our fondest memories of our childhood are some of those really epic, great moments, and this is certainly one of them. You pointed out that they printed out the picture, which is not something that I imagine you expected, and that was my favorite part of the video, honestly. When they pulled that out, and it showed that, man, they really care. Like, they knew they were building a lifelong fan, and it wasn't about chasing clout or anything like that. It was just about doing kind of what was right in that moment. So it was a really awesome moment for you and your family, and I'm happy you got to experience that. Moving over to the kind of football side, you touched on a couple things at training camp. I have to wonder, we just talked about this in our last segment, about the 3-13 predictions that I'm sure you've heard. We both dismissed them as laughable, but I want to get your take on what do you think the Lions are going to finish at the end of the season?
Yeah, it's funny you ask, because I had a friend ask me basically the same question earlier today. We were texting back and forth a little bit, and he's someone that gets pretty into fantasy football, maybe doesn't quite follow the Lions throughout the offseason nearly as in depth as myself or you guys. So he's asking me, hey, what are you seeing with the team this year, things like that. And he was asking for an honest, realistic record prediction. And as we all know, football, you could say 3-13, and there's always a good handful of games that can go either way. Truly, if I were to predict a record, my guess is bottom is 6-10 if everything just completely falls apart this year and we have some catastrophic injuries. I think the ceiling for this team is 11 wins. I think they're going to fall somewhere in that 9, 10, maybe 11 if they get the right bounce, one of these games. So
how often do they get that bounce though?
Not often in our history, that's for sure. Certainly we're hoping that Matt Patricia's kind of changing some of that and putting the guys in the right position when the ball does bounce a little awkwardly. But yeah, I would think that right in that realm of the 9-10 wins is right where this team looks to be headed. I think honestly, my biggest reason for that prediction is their schedule. As a lot of us know and have heard, the NFC North is just brutal this year. I don't think that any of the teams within the division are quite as strong as maybe some of the national guys are saying. Mm-hmm. I think that they do all have their faults, and I think that the Lions themselves are not without their faults certainly as well. So I think all 4 teams truly are going to be right in that 7 to 11 win range. So the division games are going to be crucial this year, and if they can at least split the division games and maybe hopefully sweep one of the teams within the division this year, they're going to put themselves in a position to at least be competing hopefully for that division title come the end of the season, and worst case at least have themselves in a position to get a wild card berth this year. I think the playoffs are truly the expectation for most of us this year, and they're not going to. I don't think the NFC North is going to put 3 teams into the playoffs. Very rarely do we see one division put 3 teams into the playoffs. So if they want even a shot at it this year, I think that they at least have to finish second place in the division.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a super competitive division this year. When you look at years in the past, and it hasn't been, there's always been 1 or maybe 2 teams that have just been kind of absolutely terrible. It's really competitive, and I think your record prediction, the 9 to 10 wins, is along the lines of what most Lions fans want to feel, that cautiously optimistic thing. and you offer that worst case scenario 6 wins, which is why that 3-13 prediction to me seems so laughable, because worst case scenario, like you said, 6-5 wins. I just don't see 3 really happening this season, at least for the Lions. But Ben, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. And before we let you go, is there any Twitter plugs or things like that? Of course, you can check out Ben's writing at MichiganSportsAndEntertainment.com in the Lions section. And is there anything else?
Yeah, if you do want to follow me on Twitter, I am at the extra point FF, or you can find me maybe just by typing in my name, which is Ben C. But that's the handle is at the extra point FF. I do share quite a bit about the Lions. I write certainly for Michigan Sports and Entertainment. I'll be doing quite a bit of that this season as well, and sharing. That's where you can find the video as well if you haven't seen it yet of my boys and I meeting Stafford on Saturday.
Absolutely, and we'll make sure to repost that tweet so people know what it is that we're talking about. And Ben, you've been an awesome interview, my man. You're welcome back on the show anytime, especially as this Lions season gets into full swing. I'm sure we'll have room for opinions and things like that. So let us know if you want to be back. And congratulations again on the moment you got to have with your son and Matthew Stafford. I really think that's something that you and your family is going to remember for a long time.
Yeah, appreciate you guys having me on. Certainly, anytime you're looking for a guest, be more than happy to jump on with you, talk Lions, and hopefully we'll be talking quite a bit here over the season, that's for sure.
Absolutely. All right, we're back. That was an awesome interview, don't you think, Chase?
Yeah, absolutely. Ben is obviously a great guest and knows what he's talking about when it comes to Lions. So awesome, really cool story there for him. And definitely thing that happened there at camp. So,
yep. I'm glad we got to have him on. I'm a big sucker for like heartwarming family stories and things like that, especially with the father and son. I always love that kind of thing. So I'm glad we got to talk to Ben, and I'm glad it happened to one of our own people at Michigan Sports and Entertainment, because our writers work really hard, and they're definitely passionate fans, just like our listeners. So to see them rewarded, it certainly makes you feel valued, or it makes the whole community feel valued realistically.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the moments like those that kind of make a team. It's that I know a lot of people often say and I definitely agree with that. This is one of those things where it's outside the game, and the fact that he was able to create his kids is just awesome. So
yeah, I mean, I'll tweet on our account every now and then. These kind of heartwarming stories revolving around sports, and they're not always necessarily Michigan sports, but I tweeted with the hashtag more than just a game, because I mean, this really just is, it is, it's not just watching people play a sport. It isn't, it's being a fan and being committed to an organization is something that, if done properly, can be one of the greatest joys of any person's life. And that's why, I think you and I do this podcast, and that's why we write.
Yeah, absolutely. I do it as, like I said, I'm a sports writer because I love the connection with sports, and I love the thing that sports can do. It's not only just the game, it's the stuff outside the game as well. And I think that's what creates the story. And I think that's what journalism is all about as well, is just creating and capturing those stories that happen not only in the game, but outside the game as well.
All right, man. Well, I know this episode's running a little long, but that's what happens when you have an interview, and I don't regret it one bit. But we have to get to our 5th story tonight, and that's another entertainment segment. I've really enjoyed doing these, so I thought that we would add a little one before we close things out today. Chase, I told you I was going to surprise you when we talk about what I've been watching over the past couple of weeks, but I want to know, is there any movies, Netflix, TV things that you've been watching over the past couple of weeks you want to talk about?
There's actually something that I kind of forgot about, and I actually kind of want to bring up. I'm not sure if it's
a surprise for me.
Yeah, another surprise for you. Yeah, I hope it doesn't necessarily rain on your parade and what you're talking about. But
it's the same
but if you guys are big Marvel fans at all, our Marvel universe, there were some big things that were announced in terms of the movies that they have planned for the Phase 4 upcoming, which I'm really excited about. They have the new Black Widow movie that they announced. I think it's, well, let's see, the movies they have: Black Widow, The Eternals, Shang-Chi and the Legends of the Ten Rings.
You doing off the top of your head, or you got a list?
List here.
Oh, okay. Jeez, I was like, how into you? Oh, okay.
I have a list here, yeah. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and then Thor, Love and Thunder. And I think there's also another one I think it's called Blade, if I'm not mistaken.
You're going to add another 20 minutes onto this podcast, because now we have to talk about all of these. All right, man. The first thing I got to talk about is that Thor is Lady Thor.
And that was the biggest thing, I think, that was the huge news, is the fact that Lady Thor, they've got Natalie Portman in that role, and in that movie, I think it's set for a 2021 release, if I'm not mistaken.
What do you make of that? I mean, she had the comments that were kind of bashing Marvel when she played Jane, whatever it was, in the first Thor movies, and now she's getting to be Thor, and she's going to obviously be the star of that movie. I mean, what do you make of that kind of 180?
Oh, a lot of people wanted to see, what's her name, Tessa Thompson, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the woman who played
Valkyrie or whatever.
Yeah, she plays Valkyrie. I know a lot of people said they wanted to see her as female Thor,
but she's like the Queen of Asgard, right, or something.
As a Queen of Asgard, so they wanted to, I don't know. I don't really know how they wanted it to work, but a lot of people were like, "Oh, she should have been the female Thor." And
well, I know that Valkyrie or whatever. I think they're going to explore her as like an LGBT character, which is another big thing that's kind of the big takeaway from this big announcement, is that there's all sorts of representation, which if you look back to some of our previous conversations about entertainment, we talked about all the Disney stuff and people complaining about representation, and here I think people are really, really into it. I mean, some people are backlashing against Lady Thor, but like, it's going to be awesome, man, and like, we all know it's going to be awesome. They did announce Blade. I like the casting for that. And what was the other one, the China-based one?
It was the Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings.
Yeah, they got all that casting right. They have, actual people of Asian descent, playing those roles. It's going to be authentic. It's going to be cool. And, what else do you want to talk about?
Otherwise, like I said, I think it's just another great point of, Tessa Thompson and Chris Hemsworth are back together again. They were obviously in Thor Ragnarok, and then they were in Men in Black International, I think it was.
Yeah, they have great
newest installment of that. Yeah, they've got really good chemistry, so really excited to see them back there. But another movie I watched, it's been out for a little bit. It's just a Netflix thing. There's also a bunch of Netflix TV shows that are coming with Marvel. We might talk about those another time.
Oh, man.
But
do like an extra
I know. But I know another Netflix movie I recently just watched. Will Always Be My Maybe. It's got Ali Wong and Randall Park in it. Those two are the guest stars, and there is a surprise guest star from Keanu Reeves in the movie. So we ended up talking about John Wick a couple weeks ago. But yeah, Keanu Reeves actually ends up showing in the movie. He is absolutely hilarious in that movie. I absolutely recommend it. I watched it multiple times on Netflix, so you guys should give it a watch. I really recommend it. It's a Netflix-only movie, so you guys aren't going to find it anywhere else, but if you guys are big Netflix bingers like I am, I think that's definitely a good movie if you want to watch that.
All right. Well, I was going to ask you a bunch of questions about that, but we ended up talking about Marvel, so I'm sorry, but I'm glad you watched that movie, but I'm going to talk about my thing. The thing that I have been watching for the past 2 weeks, really the past week nonstop, is anything and everything I can find with Gordon Ramsay. He is my absolute favorite person, and MasterChef and Kitchen Nightmares and Hotel Hell are like the best drug I could ever find. I can't get enough of them. I'm binging seasons. I mean, okay, he's a dick, but not really. He wants you to succeed. He just doesn't take crap. And Chase will vouch for this. That is me to a T. But he has a British accent. So he's just absolutely incredible, man. Of course, MasterChef is kind of a culinary competition of amateur chefs trying to determine who has the best palate and best abilities to be called, a master chef. The first season was absolutely awesome. I'm in the middle of the second season. I'm enjoying it just as much. I find myself watching these shows because I really enjoy analyzing the production of it. You guys have heard me talk a lot about wrestling, so I kind of view everything as some sort of sports entertainment, except that these shows keep my attention and they're actually good. They're super dramatic, but man, if you got like a couple hours to kill while you're working on something or editing someone's article, this is the thing to turn on. You ever watched any of the Gordon Ramsay shows?
I've watched a couple of them, but I think one of the biggest things I just saw recently with Gordon Ramsay, and it was, if you're familiar with, I'm sure everyone's familiar with it, the Billboard topping song "Old Town Road." Lil Nas X, the song "Old Town Road" by Lil Nas X.
I know the song.
But this relation to it was the fact that he dropped a song called "Panini." It was about sandwiches. So the joke was,
I did see this.
Was the fact that Gordon Ramsay
taught him how to make a panini.
Exactly, taught him how to make a panini, which I thought was hilarious. That was the only thing I've seen about Gordon Ramsay recently, but
and Gordon Ramsay, he's a Twitter animal, dude. He's always, people send pictures and tag him, and he comments them and just berates them. It's absolutely incredible. So yeah, that's what I've been watching, and we'll keep this segment as short as we've already run it, at the risk of losing any more listeners. So Chase, before we go home, why don't you let the people know where they can find you?
You guys can find me on Twitter at Chase Sussex, Sussex is the last name. And you guys can also find my other podcast, Hockeytown Rundown, on Twitter. We talk about the Red Wings. I know we didn't cover any Red Wings here this week, but once the season kicks off, we'll have plenty to talk about. So be sure to stay tuned with that.
Yep, and make sure that you're following us here at MSE Countdown, and you're checking out all the articles that we post at MichiganSportsAndEntertainment.com. You can follow that site's main Twitter at MichSportsEnt. That's at MICH Sports ENT. And as always, you can find me at David Rosenberg on Twitter. That's ROSENBERGG, 2 G's. Most of my activity is regarding Detroit sports and politics. So if you're big into that and arguing on Twitter, at me, follow me. And that's our show. Thanks so much for listening, guys. And we'll be back at you next week.
Peace.